There is this free open source software I've stumbled upon a couple of months ago called Tixel, which was formerly known as Tool. It allows you to create graphics using a completely real-time, node-based editor and has a lot of features for syncing content to music, so you can use it as a live audio visualizer and for VJing. However, they also advertise themselves as a tool for motion graphics, and that's what I'm going to investigate in this video. Is Tixel a valid choice for creating motion graphics? Tixel has a huge variety of operators which you can use in the node graph. The default layout is set to list all the nodes in the panel on the left. The space in the center is dedicated to your node graph, where you add and organize the nodes, and on the right side you have the live preview and the parameters of the currently selected node. You can adjust the values of the parameters by holding left click and dragging your mouse. That will automatically show some kind of crosshair. When moving your mouse along the vertical bar, you can control in which increments you will adjust the value, and on the horizontal bar you can see the current value and the range of the current increments. In my opinion, this is a pretty cool solution to both quickly jump to big values and make precise adjustments, without relying on hotkeys, which is great for pen tablet and touchscreen users. The live preview will always render the currently selected node. However, once you have a long chain of nodes, you might want to adjust one of the first nodes of the setup and see how it affects the final result. In this case, you can select the last node of your setup and pin it by using this icon or by pressing P on your keyboard. You can also add nodes by holding down left click and then use the search bar, or by clicking or dragging the input of an existing node, which will bring up a list of compatible and related nodes. You can also go into a lot of the nodes to see how they work. This is also used for presets that act as interactive tutorials, showing and teaching you the basics with a few examples. What feels weird in my opinion is the timeline, since by default it isn't using frames but bars, which are adjusted to the BPM of the project, which is part of Tixel's functionality to sync animations to music. You can also set it to frames, but configuring the frame rate isn't as easy. When exporting a video, you can configure the frame rate, but you can't set a frame rate for the preview. This already is a huge limitation for motion graphics, as frame rate and timing are one of the most important things. However, it comes with the advantage of your project not being tied to a certain frame rate, so that you can export it in whatever frame rate you want and have the timings remain the same. You can control the overall speed of the animations in Tixel, but this isn't equivalent to configuring a set frame rate. Now that we covered the essential things regarding the UI and general structure of the software, I want to give an overview of what types of nodes we have, so you can evaluate what you can create with Tixel. We have SDFs, which is an abbreviation for signed distance field, and basically are math functions which distance can be used to render adjustable geometric shapes. Those are generally in 2D, but by using a technique called ray marching, you can combine multiple iterations to create 3D shapes from them. The advantage of that is that they don't consist out of polygons, so you don't have to deal with topology and also get perfectly smooth geometry, which is also useful when combining SDFs with each other, as you can create very smooth transitions between them and create very interesting results in general. But you also have access to regular polygon-based 3D objects. In general, most of the tools work in 3D space, which means you can also position a camera and use depth of field. Then you have a lot of nodes to create and manipulate points, which you can use to scatter SDFs and other 3D content, and also for the creation of particle systems. You also have procedural 2D textures and 2D post-processing effects. You can also use a render target node to render a 3D scene, which basically turns the scene into a 2D image, which you can then process accordingly or use as a texture input for 3D content again. I think you can already tell that it can get pretty complex, which isn't really a bad thing. It's more proof of Tixel's capability, especially when considering that everything of that is performed in real time. So obviously Tixel focuses on the creation of 3D content, so I tried creating some procedural 3D motion graphics with it, aiming for something that looks like the satisfying 3D animated loops you sometimes see on social media. So I started with a cube mesh and instantly encountered several limitations. I couldn't figure out how to add bevels or Catmull-Clark subdivision to the cube, which I found to be pretty essential. But I guess you can alternatively just use a SDF cube if you want rounded corners and edges. You can also set a PBR material and texture environment, which is good, but loading images feels very awkward, since you first have to open the project directory in Tixel and create a subfolder to add images by drag and dropping them. Also, EXR files don't seem to be supported at all, which kinda destroys the point of a texture environment in my opinion, but then again, it is not a path tracer, so it's not that bad I guess, but as a 3D artist, I already have a collection of HDRI environments which I can't make use of since over 90% of them are EXR files. I wanted to create the animation by distributing cubes on points and then influencing the points using fields to animate the position of the cubes. I've tried doing this using SDFs, but found the workflow with meshes to be easier since it is easier to keep track of what's happening. And actually, achieving this rather simple concept I had in my mind turned out to be harder than I thought. But a lot of this was just due to my lack of experience with the software, since I didn't know which nodes I would have to use. While testing around, I accidentally created a lot of different results than I initially wanted, which you would think to be more complex to achieve than what I was going for. It still was pretty fun to use, even if I didn't get the results I wanted on the first try. But from all the different variations I got during the creation, you can already tell that Tixel is capable of creating these types of motion graphics that heavily rely on proximity fields. But I was really annoyed that I wasn't able to add bevels to the cubes. As an experienced 3D artist, it is almost painful to work with completely sharp cubes. In general, the point system in Tixel is very powerful and can also be used to create particle systems and curves. By the way, if you're interested in Blender and nodes, you should check out my compositing pack for Blender, MP-Comp, which you can download for free since it is offered using a pay-what-you-want pricing. It adds over 90 unique post-processing effects into Blender's compositor. You can check out this video to learn more. I wanted to test the capabilities of creating 2D motion graphics since I saw some interesting looking examples on the official show wheel. The examples were in a style that reminded me of motion graphics in anime openings, so I wanted to create an animation of some animated Japanese text. It took a few minutes to find everything, but it felt intuitive enough that I could figure out how to add a solid color layer, text and merge them. But when I wanted to insert the Japanese katakana, Tixel rendered them neither in the UI nor the preview. So I stick to Latin letters instead, but when I wanted to change the font, I've encountered the next limitation. Tixel uses signed distance fields to render the fonts, so regular TTF or OTF fonts aren't supported. There is a documentation of how to convert fonts into the format Tixel could read, but in my opinion, the user should ideally never have to deal with limitations themselves. From a designer's perspective, I like to browse all of my already installed fonts, which in the case of Tixel isn't possible. And that really made me feel limited when it comes to layouting. So I tried coming up with a different idea for 2D motion graphics. I thought about creating something with lines, so I created a new project and named it accordingly. I used a radial points node to create a spiral, made a render setup with a 2D background layer again, and while adjusting the spiral, I've noticed the texture input of it. Tixel will automatically make recommendations of what nodes you can add to a selected input, and I chose a linear gradient. And the gradient was then correctly mapped to the spiral to follow its shape, which felt very intuitive and made me think about the potential of that. So I tested a few texture nodes and then stumbled upon the raster node, which didn't really work on the spiral, but the description of the node piqued my interest, so I've tried connecting it to my 2D layer, which worked great. And using the Tixel's preset browser, which is pretty great, I looked through multiple of the presets and decided that's something I want to process further in an animation. So I basically tried keyframing the raster texture to create some interesting transitions between shapes. The edges of the shapes were pretty sharp, and I tried looking for an anti-aliasing effect, but didn't find one. Later I found out I just had to adjust the feather of the raster effect, which solved the hard pixelated edges. After laying out the main keyframes, I noticed I have real trouble adjusting the timings of keyframe animations in Tixel. I often misclick on the timeline and end up accidentally moving keyframes instead of scrubbing through the timeline. Copying keyframes feels more troublesome than it should be, and the animation curves were also not that easily adjustable. So yeah, the timing looks really off, except for one section towards the end, which was pretty close to the speed and timing I was aiming for. But that was another lesson that I should probably create the animations procedurally instead of relying on keyframes. I also added an echo or motion blur effect, which again was something that felt pretty nice and gave pretty interesting results. This test scene made me realize that everything I liked about Tixel were the nodes, and everything I disliked were UI and UX decisions outside of the usage of nodes. So I decided to focus more on creating stuff using the nodes. So I tried creating something completely procedurally animated. Again, the generative nodes allowed me to quickly get good looking results. This time I completely stick to the anim value node to animate my creation, but again I had issues because I wanted to add impact to the animation without it looping infinitely. So I could export it as a video and then process it further in other softwares. But I had a really hard time trying to achieve this without using keyframes. I first tried using the endless mode of the anim value node, which will linearly scale the outputted value over time, and then feeding this into a math function to create an easing. But after some trial and error, I found it easier to just use the different modes of the anim value node and adjusting the parameters. By using the sine mode and adjusting the parameters and frame range, I was able to get an easing I was satisfied with. So I ended up with this animation of a spiral, shockwave or whatever. But what about exporting it as a video so you can share it or further process it in other software? Well, the export works and also renders pretty fast, but the settings are pretty limited. Apparently, you can only export them as MP4s or image sequences, and you have to manually add the file extension to the output's name, which feels a bit counterintuitive. But let's head on to Tixel's particle system. Like I said a bit earlier, it relies on the point system of Tixel. And honestly, this is where I feel like Tixel performs best at. A lot of existing software already have particle systems integrated, but most of the time they are either very hard to understand or so simple that they feel very limiting. And I think the developers of Tixel have found a pretty good balance of complexity and ease of use. Especially since Tixel is entirely real-time, it is a lot of fun to play around with the particle systems since you very quickly get good looking results. What did bug me was that depending on the setup, you couldn't really skip the beginning of the particle simulation. I guess it is because Tixel heavily relies on buffers, and when there isn't anything in the buffer yet, there's nothing the particle simulation can display. Aside from that, Tixel has a really capable particle system that is able to handle a lot of points in real time and also feels flexible and easy to use. And I think the particle simulations might be one of Tixel's biggest selling points at its current state. Surprisingly, there aren't really that many software packages dedicated to particle simulation, especially when it comes to the open source segment. And Tixel is just so advanced at it that I can actually see Tixel becoming a part of a VFX production pipeline someday when it comes to particles. The only thing stopping it from that are the inconsistent previews you get sometimes due to relying a lot on buffers, and the export options are more than limiting, which both aren't problems when using it as a tool for VJing, but for motion graphics it's just not production ready. But you can also turn these limitations into features. For example, for the creation of glitch art. This also works on imported videos, so if you're interested in creating these kind of effects, Tixel could also be interesting to you. It is in a really weird state when it comes to motion graphics, because yes, you can create motion graphics in Tixel, but you can't really use it to realize an existing concept or vision you have. It's so easy to get good looking results without the need of having to wait for simulation cache to bake, but in my opinion there were so many weird limitations that I was never able to actually achieve what I was going for. I would still say that it was fun to use because of the real-time preview and that it had a nice learning curve. It is still hard to learn when comparing it to creative software in general, but when comparing it with other node-based simulation tools like Blender or Houdini, Tixel feels a lot more intuitive. Like, just using the software feels like having a tutorial running in the background and following along. There are also a lot of presets and literally tutorials inside presets that explain different nodes and their functions in an interactive way. The node graph editor feels so carefully designed and intuitive that it has really left me with a lot of disappointment after working with the keyframes and the export options. Currently, Tixel is at a really weird stage where the node graph is already a fully developed product with a lot of attention to detail, while some functions you would consider very basic are poorly implemented and feel very unfinished or are straight up missing. Outside of its VJ purpose, I don't really see Tixel as production ready, at least not when it comes to motion graphics and VFX. But I don't think that's an unsolvable problem for the devs when looking at what they've already achieved. It's definitely an exciting software and something to keep on your radar, and I think you can already implement it into the creation of personal projects, but I wouldn't use it for client work just yet. At least that's the impression I got. Maybe I just suck at it. It doesn't seem too unlikely. Like always, I encourage you to play around with Tixel for yourself a bit to shape your own opinion, so that you can let me know in the comments how much you agree or disagree with my statements. Also, YouTube has this revenue hype feature, which is supposed to help smaller creators that produce quality content to get some increased reach. Everyone gets 3 hypes a week for free, which they can use on a video they've enjoyed. You can even spend all on one video. Also, you can purchase additional hypes, but please don't do that. But if you could use one of your free ones on this video, that would be very nice. I'm not actually sure how much it helps, but let's find that out together. See ya!